Hello, and welcome to week one of the Real Keto Solutions 6-week intensive program. My name is Wendy Budd, and I am a ketogenic nutrition practitioner. We are going to look into the ketogenic diet, why normal diets don't work, how you can incorporate a ketogenic diet into your life. Week one, we're going to be looking at why diets don't work. So, now any calorie restricted diet will initially lead to weight loss in the short term. However, after approximately 1 year of caloric restriction, the weight plateaus and you begin to put back all the weight that you lost and more. Now, we are led to believe that by eating less and moving more, you will lose weight. And while this is in essence partly true, it doesn't take into account the other issues pertaining to weight loss, particularly how the metabolism will slow if on a calorie restricted diet long term. It also doesn't look into the hormonal effects on diet and weight loss or weight gain. Now, we've all tried various diets in the past, and while initially doing any calorie restricted diet, you will lose weight initially. But after a few months or longer, the body's metabolic rate will decline, and to carry on with the weight loss, you would need to eat less and less. Every single dieter knows this. I'm sure you do too. Now, this is referred to the calories in, calories out model. Eat less and move more. Now, we're going to look at why this model is only partly true. Now, why does calorie restriction not work in the long term? It's due to this vicious cycle of undereating. So while initially eating less calories will lead to weight loss, because of the decrease in energy expenditure, you will therefore have an increase in hunger as the metabolic rate falls, and therefore you will regain weight, and then the cycle goes on and on. So we are permanently on this cycle of eating less, losing weight, metabolic rate goes down, and there's an increase in hunger, so we regain weight. Now, there are some diet myths that we would like to look at, and these are that eating 6 small meals a day helps to keep the metabolism high, therefore improves weight loss. Now, this is wrong. Eating more or having more eating windows will lead to more insulin release, therefore causing more hunger and more fat storage. So the idea that eating small portions, but more of them, increases the metabolic rate is in fact untrue. So by increasing the amount of eating windows, you do not actually help with weight loss. The opposite is in fact true. So the more meals that you consume, the more of a hormone called insulin is released in the body. Now, insulin release causes more hunger, as the job of insulin is to reduce the level of blood sugar, and it pushes that sugar into the cells of the body. This quick decrease in sugar levels within the blood will create more hunger and also creates more fat storage. The next dietary myth is that dietary fat, makes you fat. Now, this is also wrong. Fat, although having more calories than carbohydrates, actually increases a number of satiety hormones such as ghrelin and leptin, which actually make you feel fuller for longer, therefore not wanting to overeat as many calories. So although it is true that fat does have more calories than a gram of carbohydrates and a gram of fat, fat does have more calories per gram. However, it does keep you satiated quicker and for longer. The third dietary myth that we would like to look at is that counting calories is essential for weight loss. Now, this really is important because all calories are not equal. Calories do not take into account the nutrient density of a particular food. So if you think of a calorie restricted diet, and let's just say for me, I'm eating a calorie restricted diet of 1,500 calories a day. Now, this model assumes that by getting my calories from, let's say, Mars bars, as long as I'm keeping the calories below 1,500 calories, I can get those calories from Mars bars. Now, of course, that is ridiculous because, as you all know, I wouldn't be getting the amount of protein, minerals, and vitamins from that food. So the counting calories is only part of the picture. A well-balanced diet that contains all of the macronutrients, proteins, fats, and micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, is essential for health as well as weight loss. Now, the fourth myth that we would like to or the fifth myth, is that you need exercise to lose weight. Now, although losing weight is aided by exercise, in fact, it is not the be-all and end-all. And often you'll hear people quote that if they do a lot of exercise, they can eat what they like. And the issue of this is that you cannot outrun a bad diet. And most professionals will tell you it's actually 80% diet, 20% exercise in any weight loss regime. So although exercise is extremely good for health, it is not the full picture when it comes to weight loss, and diet is key here. And lastly, the myth that while on a diet, you will be hungry. Now, on conventional diets that are high in carbohydrates, this is very, very true. And the hunger pangs generally are why people fall off the wagon with a conventional diet. However, we will explain why on a ketogenic diet you can lose weight without hunger. And this is why the ketogenic diet really is a great way to maintain weight loss. Now, we're often asked, where did the dietary guidelines come from? And you would assume that these guidelines are rooted in rigorous science, but actually this isn't so. Now, the guidelines really started with a gentleman who was an American physiologist called Ansel Benjamin Keyes. He had a particular hypothesis, which is a scientific guess, that dietary saturated fat particularly caused cardiovascular heart disease. And he advised that the amount of dietary fat should be reduced if you wanted to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, particularly heart attack. And we now know that the very influential study that Mr. Keyes did, looking at, or the data that he published, was from 7 countries, which you'll see on this graph here, which is a nice curve. And it shows at the bottom we have Japan, and it's probably difficult for you to see, but actually you can see that the amount of fat ate by the Japanese was very, very low, and also that the amount of heart attack was also very low. And then if you look at the top of the curve, which is the USA, you will see that people in the USA eat the most amount of dietary fat and also have the most amount of heart attack. So it looks, looking at this data, that Mr. Keyes' hypothesis was in fact true, that there is a correlation or an association with the amount of dietary fat and the risk of heart disease. Now, today we know that actually Keyes cherry-picked the data to show his hypothesis or his guess to be true. Now, on the left here, we have the data that Keyes released, but in fact, we now know that actually he looked at data from over 22 countries. And this is the full data here. So Keyes actually left countries out that didn't fit his nice bell curve that you have here. So if you think of countries that actually are renowned for eating a large amount of fat, such as France, the French eat a lot of cheese, they also eat a lot of cream, and actually have very, very low rates of heart disease. Also, the Germans eat a lot of saturated fat, particularly fat from animal sources, and again, they do not fit the picture, so thus were left out of the data that Keyes published originally. Now, we all know that this is not scientific. This isn't how science should be done. Also, the data for this 7-country study was done via a questionnaire. And questionnaires are useful in many ways, but they are not conclusive. What they show is an association. So you could say that possibly there is an association between eating a high amount of fat and heart disease. But then further studies would need to be done where we look into this to see whether the association is in fact causative. So is fat the cause of heart disease, or is it just an association? Now, these further studies were never done. However, the guidelines really took traction, and they were introduced in 1977 in America, and they were the dietary guidelines. The US Senate produced the dietary outline, which is still relied upon today from Keyes' flawed hypothesis and 7-country study. Along with the cherry picking of data, other issues with the Keyes study have been widely criticised. As I was saying earlier, causality cannot be proven from an epidemiological study. Epidemiological study is basically a non-clinical scientific test. So although it's useful, Generally, other studies such as randomized controlled double-blinded studies would need to be done to actually prove causation. And again, these were never done. So as a result of these flawed studies and bad science, the advice from the dietary guidelines was to eat a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And this was promoted around the Western world and unfortunately has caused a dramatic increase in type 2 diabetes and obesity since 1980. So let's look at the assumption that the dietary guidelines are responsible for the obesity epidemic, which began in the early 1980s. And following the lipophobic demonization of dietary fat by Keyes and the resulting dietary guidelines encouraged individuals to eat more carbohydrates and refined sugar. And people did this, I mean, I can remember being very young. I was born in 79, but everybody was eating margarine. Nobody really had butter. The vegetable oils, the lower fat or better fat cooking oils that came from vegetable or seed oils were generally cooked with sunflower oil, soybean oil, canola, rapeseed and such. Rather than what we would have used in the sort of 50s and 60s, which would have been lard, which would have been high in saturated fat. This also created huge opportunities for food manufacturing companies to create low-fat convenience foods, which were low in fat but were high in sugar. Now, this made the food manufacturing companies a lot of money because actually foods that are high in sugar tend to be easy to preserve. And had a better shelf life than foods that were higher in fat. And again, we have that dietary myth that snacking between meals, this was encouraged, and it was encouraged to keep the metabolism high. And again, we have that adage of, eat what you like, just do more exercise. And unfortunately, this doesn't take into account the unfortunate addictive nature of sweet food, and particularly refined carbohydrates. So all of this really produced the perfect storm for increasing waistlines, obesity, and unfortunately the type 2 diabetic endemic that we now have throughout the Western world and beyond. Now, if we look at the rates of obesity, you can see that in 1977, the dietary guidelines were introduced, and the rates of obesity are actually classified by the body mass index being over 30. Now, in 1980, the number of people with a BMI of 30 or over was 12.3%. Now, if you look at the data from 1994 to 1999, these rates had risen to 20.6% in males and to over 26% in females. So that's 26% of females having a body mass index over 30. By 2010, again, this rate had risen to 34.4% in males and to 36.1% in females. And the link is there so you can go and check those out for yourself. So we can see that since the dietary guidelines were introduced in 1977, the rates of obesity have literally trebled. Now, this is an example of the ketogenic diet food pyramid. And when we think about a ketogenic diet, we literally will turn the current guidelines on their head. So generally the lower block of the food pyramid would be bread, pasta, grains, and that is, according to the standard American diet guidelines, is the basis of the diet. Now, in the ketogenic diet, this is not true, and actually the base of that pyramid is fat. So fats, good quality fats from meat, from coconut oil, olive oil, from avocados and dairy. The second layer of the pyramid would be protein. Now, this protein can come from fish, poultry, meat, various different sources of protein, including dairy and cheese. And the third layer of the pyramid would be vegetables, leafy green vegetables particularly, and we encourage people to eat vegetables that grow above ground. And the reason for this is there is less starch, which can then therefore be turned into sugar in the body. And then lastly, the top of the pyramid, so this is what you eat the least of, would be things such as nuts, seeds, and legumes. So really it is turning the conventional or the standard American diet right on its head. And also in the top of the pyramid, you can see that you can have a small amount of berries, such as raspberries, blueberries, blackberries within the ketogenic diet. And these would be considered a special treat because, of course, they do contain high amounts of fructose, fruit sugar, and again, that can raise issues with the ketogenic diet. So this is an example, a pictorial example of a ketogenic diet, and again it's very difficult to get your head around initially. You know, how can you maintain weight loss while eating such a huge amount of fat? And during week 2, when we will be focusing on the macronutrients and which macronutrients are in fact essential, we will talk about this in great depth. So do join us for week 2. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting, and we would love to see you on week 2 of the Ketogenic 6-week intensive program. And we will be discussing next week the macronutrients in real depth, and we'll be taking a deep dive into what is a macronutrient. We'll be looking at all 3 of the macronutrients and specifically what they do within the blood, within the body, and how the body deals with them. So we hope to see you then. Again, this is Real Keto Solutions. We look forward to seeing you next week.